Good morning from Madison, Wisconsin. We are live on Facebook and YouTube as we get ready for Championship Sunday at the AUDL Final Four. Game Day Live, presented by the AUDL with Megan Tormey, Chuck Kindred, Ian Toner, Brian Jones. I'm Evan Lepler. The Radicals and the Roughnecks. I think that Madison has been waiting for this moment. Dallas trying to win their second title in 3 years. And, I was thinking this morning how every championship weekend usually has at least one kind of iconic, memorable, classic game. And both games yesterday were pretty solid, pretty close, pretty competitive. I wouldn't call either one a classic. Do you think today is going to be a classic?
I think if Madison shows up right away, it has the potential to be a classic.
You sound skeptical.
Simply because history has repeated itself a number of times for Madison, where you think they've really put the pieces together, they're going to come out and have a strong showing at championship weekend, and they don't manage to get it done. And I love Madison. I want this to be their year, but I have a lot of faith in Dallas and their strength in numbers. And so I think if Dallas comes out and puts on their best performance, then it has the possibility to going the same way as the past.
Hey, Chuck, today will be your third time calling the Madison Radicals in the finals. A close loss to Toronto in 2013, close loss to San Jose in 2015. Will the third time be the charm?
I sure hope so. I mean, I'm rooting for Madison, no doubt. Great community, great team. And I think, Ian brought up that this is an era game. A lot of these guys are kind of nearing the end of their prime, and they're ready, and they got some young talent. They've got a good culture. They got good momentum. They could definitely do it in the front of the home crowd. I mean, they looked awfully comfortable here yesterday, so I could see it.
Dallas Roughnecks will be shorthanded. No Kevin Richardson, hurt his ankle yesterday, and no Dan Emmons. A couple guys that followed each other at North Texas University, both hurt their left ankles making plays yesterday. And besides the two of them and Joel Clutton, there's not a ton of gigantic size on this Dallas team.
And I think that's going to be problematic when you're talking about the downfield matchups, whether it's O versus D or D versus O for these squads. And aside from the size, I think one matchup that's going to be really pivotal is the volume of playtime and the matchups that Brandon Malachek draws when he goes out there and starts on the O-line. We know he had a shaky first half against New York. With some of the offensive depth on this team now injured and newer players coming into the fold, they're going to be relying on Malachek on the offense even more. He's going to need to turn in a solid handling performance, and if there are turnovers, KPS, who will likely draw that matchup, is going to be one to try and exploit that and go to the house as much as possible.
The young guys on Dallas did step up yesterday, and they're going to need to do so today, talking about guys like Carson Wilder and Connor Olson. Just will be 20 later this week. He started the game yesterday, kind of bouncing back and forth between O and D. He's full-time offense today. What do you expect from him?
Well, we talked to Wes Nemec after the end of the game yesterday. I asked him if he was surprised by Connor Olson's performance. He said no.
Yeah.
So we've seen this out of a couple young guys in the past, Darren Wu, Ben Burrell last year for Toronto, and now Connor Olson. And he did a great job yesterday of just making the plays and rescuing Chris LaRocque when he needed to. If he can continue to do that today, that'd be great. I think it's going to fall, though, on the shoulders of Jay Frood. If Jay Frood gets going early, it could be a tough day for Madison. If Jay Frood is limited, I think it just points to a Madison victory.
We were chatting with some of the guys on the Radicals, and they've said that Jay has struggled against Madison in the past, both against the Radicals and playing against Madison Club when Jay played with a Kansas City Club team. What kind of game do you foresee from Frood? Do you think Madison can do things to get in his head a little bit?
Well, I mean, Madison gets in everybody's head, I think. Offense is always tough here. Madison, it's hard to – I heard the Aviators talking – like kind of right behind us yesterday at the end of the game, and they were saying, man, our offense just couldn't get going. I think if we would have started on D, that would have been better. And then Jacob Spiro was walking by and said, yeah, I mean, pretty much everybody's offense struggles against us, And it was kind of a dig, but it's like it's really true. I mean, nobody gets going easily against Madison. You can do it, and certainly they have the athletes. I think the speed is going to be a little overwhelming for Madison. I think Dallas is really, really fast. But, yeah, you're not going to get what you want. You're going to have to kind of adjust. You're going to have to pick your spots. You might have to slow down quite a bit more than you want to, especially when you're excited and you're here to win a title,
And think about all the different matchups that they could potentially put on Jay. You've got a Sterling Kanaki. You could have a Peter Graffey crossing over. There's just an army of defenders that have size and agility and versatility that you can keep kind of rotating through to give Jay new looks every point. And that seems to be the common coaching strategy, right, Brian?
Right. Well, the trouble is that now Dallas is moving to becoming more of a one-dimensional team without Kevin Richardson on the field. Who is your other deep threat, right? So you have Connor Olsen, great, but he's no longer a surprise. So you can bet bottom dollar that Madison is going to come out and limit that. So you're going to make Jay Fruit a thrower. You're going to limit the deep looks for Dallas, and you're going to put the disc in Malachek's hands, which we saw in the first half yesterday. You pointed to it earlier. I think this is going to be a tough day for Dallas. I really do. I think Madison has the ability to make him one-dimensional and just play the rest of the game like that and force Jay Fruit to become a thrower. We've seen Jay Fruit throw a lot of assists, but it's usually from catching a lot of wide-open unders and a lot of deep passes that are short of the end zone. I think this is going to be really tough for Dallas to pull this one out.
You're the coach on this set. What do you think each coach, Wes Nemec for Dallas and Tim DeBile for Madison, most fears going into this game? What are they worried about?
I think if you're Wes Nemec and if Jay Fruit comes out, goes deep on the first possession, and Madison gets the block, I think it's over. I think it's because
over.
I think it's over. The reason is because Jay Fruit is their king. Who's defeated him so far? Not even Bo Kittredge came out. He got the block yesterday, the beginning of the fourth quarter, and Jay came down with it. And after that, New York was done, right? If that fourth quarter goes totally differently, if that disc lands out of bounds when Bo deflects it. And so I think all you have to do is get Jay Fruit run once at the beginning of this game, and it could be a rout for the Radicals.
What's Tim DeBile afraid of?
The pressure. Playing normal.
Yeah, it's all an internal fear for Tim DeBile. It's trying to make sure that his team is focused on itself and its own confidence and not focused on uncontrollable factors or things that they necessarily haven't game planned for.
Because that seems to be the issue that has plagued them in the past, right? Individual players start playing just a little bit outside of their box, just making tiny errors that the other team then capitalizes on. So that's an understandable fear, Ian, that Tim DeBile has, because I really do think that their losses in championship weekend have been well within their control.
I think back to some of the comments that you were able to get from Mike DeNardis after the AUDL South Championship. You brought it up on the Friday forecast a week or two ago. He said, when things started to get tighter, individual guys felt like they had to do more. And by going outside the confines of their system, not running the simple fundamentals of their offense, you end up putting the team in a state of chaos. And players don't know where to turn when they're not running in those fundamentals. And I think that's the nightmare scenario for Tim DeBile.
Brian, you're as close with anyone on the San Francisco Revolver team that has been kind of the defining program of this generation of Ultimate. How have you seen them stay within themselves in the biggest games and set that example?
Well, I think, humility is one of their hallmark values, and it's a tricky thing. I was talking about this with some juniors coaches in Minneapolis the other day, and they're asking, what is humility? How do you create humility? How do you work with that? And I think it's more about connecting to something bigger than yourself. And I think when programs can do that, where guys can go out and just play a role, they're not trying to make a name for themselves, they're not trying to win the game, they're not even really invested in the result. They're invested in being a part of something and creating something with their teammates. And it goes back through the history of the program. If you anchor on something bigger than right now and bigger than your team, it becomes a lot easier to play. And I think that's something Revolver does well.
I think when you're looking at it, that's the philosophical perspective that Chuck's bringing. And there was a quote from Harper Garvey last week from the U.S. Open after we won, and he said, I felt like I only used 20% of my abilities. And right now, when you look at Dallas, right, coming into this game, we were talking about in the context of Madison. You look at Dallas, right, Chris LaRock is at his best when he's using 20% of his abilities.
Right.
But we know today, with the absence of some of those players, he's going to have to use more of that and feel more of the pressure. What Ian talked about with players going to feel like they have to do more, not adhere to the system. And that's when things can break down. And that's why, bringing it all the way back to Jay Fruit, he's got to have a great game today for Dallas to win.
Well, it's pretty amazing when you look at this Dallas team because 2 years ago, obviously, they won the title. I think with Dan Emmons' injury, they're only going to have 6 guys on the field today that were on the field in the championship game 2 years ago. And 2 years ago is not that long ago. Brandon Malachek, Matty Jackson, the two Larbergs, Dalton Smith, and Thomas Slack. That's the 6. It's pretty incredible that they have reloaded, and they're still considered by many the favorite in this game.
Right. I really do think that the win in 2016 has left a sizable imprint on the culture of the Dallas Roughnecks. And you think about the caliber of players who were on that team. I mean, Bo Kittredge, Kurt Gibson, Jimmy Mickle, Dylan Freechild. You know, when you play a full season with individuals like that, you learn a lot about what it is to win. I've had a number of really interesting conversations with Kurt Gibson about his experience on the Chicago Wildfire, and he talked a lot about how a number of those players just don't know what it takes to win. They know what it takes to play hard, but they don't have that mental depth that they can dig into and put forth their best effort when it's required of them, when they're playing someone like the Madison Radicals. And a lot of players on the Dallas Roughnecks have that as a result of playing with so many high caliber athletes. And I think that has helped them find success when you think the odds are stacked against them.
I also think we can't overlook the Week 10 2017 victory that the Dallas Roughnecks notched when they came in here to Breese Stevens Field last summer. There were a few other players on that squad. Jay Fruit had transferred over to the Roughnecks. That familiarity with this setting, with this opponent, I don't think that's nothing. I think that's more great experience for them to draw on and make this moment feel less pressure-filled and more like any other game. Hey, we've been here in this scenario. We know how to walk out there and play our game plan.
Dallas won that game on June 3rd of 2017. 23-17 was the final. Madison led that game by multiple goals into the later stages. I'm trying to remember exactly what the score was. Madison was up 13-11 before they lost 23-17. So, you know, for 2.5 quarters in that game, Madison was right there and really looked like the better team. And I think this Dallas team, I don't know. I think they're not as good as they were the last couple of years, but maybe with this youth and adding in Carson Wilder and Connor Olson and Chris LaRock, and maybe they are better. Is Dallas better than the team they had the last 2 years?
I mean, I don't know that they're better, but like the thing that gets lost is they came out of the South, okay? The South is hard, okay? Every game's hard. They won the South. They beat Raleigh. Like, Raleigh could be the best team in the whole league. So I don't think this is like a fluke, and I don't think this is a team that's going to fold over under pressure. Like, they've been under pressure all year, probably more pressure than Madison can bring. And this is a battle-tested team. I think people are kind of writing off Dallas because it's the hometown Cinderella story. But I'm putting my money on Dallas. They're tough.
I just don't see how Dallas has any pressure on them. The young team, they come into this season. It's been house money since the beginning. We talked to Jim Garanser, the owner, at the beginning of the season, right before the first Raleigh game. They come right in. They're like, hey, we know we lost talent. Like, maybe we'll be lucky to go 500. But here they are in the finals. So I think they're playing with house money. I think all the pressure here is going to be on Madison to perform. And that for Dallas, this could be a moment where, like, hey, let's go out, have fun. Let's play as a team. I think you kind of touched on something, though, Chuck, which was there's something different about this Dallas team because it definitely lacks some talent, but they came together and everybody's trusting each other. All the pieces were there. But that also enhances the losses of Emmons and Kay Richardson coming into this game, right? Those two guys filled huge roles for this team, especially on a team that was younger.
Sure looked like Madison did a pretty good job handling the pressure yesterday, though. Is it a different pressure today?
Well, they exercised their demons, right? You could when Tim DeBile was talking about, hey, if when the coach notices it's the same score of the last time when you blew it, you could tell that the ghosts were hanging around.
Absolutely.
So this could feel like a day-to-day where those demons are gone, right? So they're all the pressure's off of them. They feel like they've battled that. They're back in the finals, and this crowd is going to be great today. We know it's going to be a packed house.
Maybe I'm putting too much on this, but I really think that it's important to note that LA came out and played really poorly. Madison did a great job first quarter, but LA totally looked unprepared. I mean, there were those couple air battles early in it was one of the first 4 points that Madison won, but then there were 2 reset passes that Madison was very clearly hunting. I mean, LA just looked like you said it in the broadcast, Chuck. They looked like they were not even warmed up for this game. So maybe I'm putting too much emphasis on that, but I really think the fact that LA didn't show up the first quarter and then played incredibly well the remaining three quarters, I don't know. That makes me feel like things are going to be harder for Madison today.
Well, and the West is, I don't know. I mean, I hate to say this because I'm in the West, but that might be the weakest division this year. I mean, there wasn't a lot doing out West, and LA came out flat, and they still had a sniff in the fourth quarter. I mean, there was a point where they definitely should have pulled within 3, and they kind of blew it. But, I mean, they shouldn't have been anywhere near within 3 against a championship-caliber team. So I'm not so sure Madison is a championship-caliber team.
I think the Midwest was the weakest division. I'll be happy to have that debate with you. We could go toe to toe later on. But I think to your point, Megan, yes, LA didn't show up, and also its star players never looked comfortable yesterday. I spent a lot of time this week talking about how excited I was to see Jesse Cohen take on a bigger role for this offense and get a chance to showcase himself on the big stage. He's a great player. I'm sure he'd be the first to tell you he did not have his best performance last night. Just casual reset turnovers that were costing his O-line at critical moments. And that's just one example. You can apply that same critique to several other offensive star power players who just didn't step up in the moment.
I think that's a great point. Very few, if any, guys on LA had their moment to really shine. And you think about other teams. I mean, Thomas Coolidge had his moment. KPS had like 9 moments. And Peter Graffi was very solid, got the opening goal very quickly and easily. The game, I mean, all these players are capable of having their moment, but it's like you have this expectation. Jay Frude is going to have this many moments, and Dalton Smith is going to have this many moments, and Dave Wiseman is going to have this many moments. And can those individual players deliver those moments? Because I was thinking this morning, I wanted to ask you guys, is today more about doing the little things, or is it about when the windows are really small, having a great playmaker make a championship caliber play?
It's got to be both. The thing is that with the semifinals happening already and Dallas being limited, both teams are going to be ready for this matchup, right? There's going to be I don't think there's going to be any surprises, right? We thought Madison might throw zone last night a little bit to start, but it was all man-to-man defense and high pressure from the beginning. So Dallas is not going to be surprised by anything. Conversely, Dallas is a little bit more one-dimensional. You know what Jay Frude brings, so Madison's going to be ready. So I think it's about those tight windows. Who can make those plays? Maybe on a tip disc, who's being the garbage collector coming from behind the play. We saw that yesterday for Dallas. We had one in the end zone early on where Slack came out of nowhere and there was no New York defender to help out. So who can do the little things right is going to be a big difference today.
I think it's going to be those smaller moments because I really feel that's where Madison has lost control of games in the past. Like late in the fourth quarter when Madison was trying to conserve their lead, when they were trying to slow their own offense down to play small ball, that's when LA came in, got some Ds, and they were able to score 2 points in, 45 seconds? And that kind of loss of control is where Madison's downfall tends to be. And it wasn't anyone not having a good game. It was just those small things that LA was faster to capitalize on and narrowed the gap pretty quickly at the end of the fourth quarter.
Chuck, how can Madison use its size to their advantage today and take advantage of Scott Riggles, Dave Wiseman, Pat Schreiwise, Colin Camp against a Roughnecks D that doesn't have that same type of behemoth size and strength?
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, we saw some good deep shots from Schreiwise to Colin Camp yesterday, but those were pretty high percentage, not floaty, precise hucks. I think they might want to, just test those deep defenders and see if they can get some free goals and see if they can establish themselves. I mean, if you open up a successful deep game, that creates so much more space in the offense for the unders once you start hitting a couple deeps, and they could do that. They got gigantic athletes.
And the other thing to mention is, look, Dallas was vulnerable deep yesterday. Dan Emmons was saying that he got roasted early in the game by Ben Yott. They made a subtle adjustment, changing their marks on Harper Garvey, defending their cutters a little bit differently, and New York's deep game wasn't nearly what it was in the second half like the first.
Yeah, you could clearly see Wes Nimick's impact and footprint on the second half of that game after that defense regrouped, made those tweaks. I think we've been talking about how undersized Dallas's defense may be, but I think they know how to play when they're at a size disadvantage. You look at the data points from yesterday being the second half against New York. Brian, you disagree with me.
I think we're sitting there reading so much in the performance of Dallas's D. That game, did Dallas force a single turnover? I don't think so. I really thought New York threw away that game. And that's been the story of their entire season. All Dallas did was play soft defense, say, we're going to stand 15 yards deeper than every single one of your cutters, and watch for you to turn it over on the reset.
There were a couple times when New York was unmarked and threw it away. So I think you're absolutely right. We're about 35 minutes or so from game time, and this place is already filling in. Imagine it's going to be electric atmosphere. Last question before we take a break and bring in Charlie and Aaron, and myself, Brian, and Chuck are going to head to the booth and get ready for the broadcast. One player that will define today's game with his performance. Each pick someone different that you're expecting big things from, that the pressure is on, that is going to be really critical today.
I feel like I'm taking an easy one here and saying KPS. I feel like his performance tends to set the tone for Madison. I think they're going to look to him to set the tone early in this game. And, you know, there's some players who don't do as well under pressure. I feel like when Kevin Pettit-Scandley knows that his team is looking to him to make a play, that fires him up even more. Just as we saw yesterday, you know, coaching staff asked KPS, are you good to go in another point after he made an amazing D? And he went in and made yet another amazing D, the one where we saw him crawling on the ground to continue to deflect the disc away from Chris Mazer. So I think it's KPS for Madison. He's going to set the tone this game.
You got Chuck.
I would take Shriwise. Shriwise got to be solid. This team tends to rattle. Shriwise does not tend to rattle, and they're going to need his veteran leadership, especially with the disc, to fight through what I think is going to be some tough matchups for them downfield.
I think I'm going to take Chris LaRock for the Dallas Roughnecks. I think with the shift in offensive personnel, there's going to be greater weight and responsibility on the Roughnecks handling core. And LaRock, who had 97% completion percentage coming into this game, is going to have to turn in a performance like that to keep this Dallas offense in this game.
All about Jay Frood. Both sides. Jay Frood has a good game. Dallas is champions. Jay Frood has a mediocre game or a normal game. Madison Radicals are going to win.
I'm going to throw out two names, guys that play similar roles for each team. The veteran handlers. Andrew Brown is expected to play for the Madison Radicals today. He did not play yesterday. This is a guy who's had, almost a legendary career playing with teams in Madison and Minnesota and Vancouver and all around the world. Widely considered one of the best decision makers, one of the most steady rocks back there. I was chatting with him before. He knows he's 37. He knows he's not as athletically gifted as he was 10 years ago or as many of his counterparts. But how can he harness his abilities that he still has to be an effective reset distributor for his team? And obviously Brandon Malachek, the Madison native, who loves playing here in front of these fans and has had his ups and downs throughout the season. He had some games this year when his gifted throwing ability, especially on a windy day, helped carry the Roughnecks to a win. And they went 13-1 in the South. And Chuck, you said it, there's no easy games in the South. Malachek had some games where he literally carried this team. So, obviously those aren't the number one guys for each of their teams anymore, but it's going to be interesting to see how they fit in to the overall game plan, how many points they play, how much trust their teammates have in them, playing through mistakes like we've seen through the season. So it's going to be fascinating. The top of the hour on Stadium, the Radicals and the Roughnecks compete for the 7th AUDL title. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Game Day Live continues with Megan and Ian, Charlie Eisenhood from Multiworld, Aaron Maraca, the coach of the Minnesota Wind Chill, standing by. A great day of coverage from the AUDL Championship weekend just beginning here on Sunday in Madison.
continuing coverage, Game Day Live. AUDL Championship weekend is underway, and we've got the final game coming up here shortly. I'm Megan Tormey, joined by editor of Ulti-World, Charlie Eisenhood, my broadcasting partner, Ian Toner, and then head coach of the Minnesota Wind Chill, Aaron Maraca. Thank you so much for joining us again today. And I want to launch into this discussion by talking a little bit about what weaknesses we saw from both teams yesterday. What New York did that gave Dallas a tough time, and what we saw from LA that gave Madison a bit of issues. And, you know, do we think those will be factors today, knowing their opponent? Charlie, you know New York so well. I'd really like to start with you. What did you see New York doing that gave Dallas a trickier time?
Well, I think what we saw from New York was really an offensive performance that kind of exposed some weaknesses perhaps in Dallas's game plan. Early in the game, New York was getting everything that they wanted going deep. And eventually Dallas adjusted to that. But even then, New York's offense generally flowed pretty well. I mean, there's a reason that game was so high scoring. And it's not just because Dallas's offense was good, it's because New York's was as well. It was a few small mistakes, really, that kind of swung that game in Dallas's direction, and I think Dallas's depth showed through. But I do think that we saw the ability to get deep on Dallas's athletes, and early in the game, I think Dallas was trusting that they could win those one-on-ones, and really that wasn't happening against Ben Yot and Jeff Babbitt. Now, is Madison's O-line quite as dynamic? I think that's the question mark for Madison. But at the same time, I do think that you can score on Dallas, and that could be something that, if Madison's able to get their O-line off the field pretty consistently, they're going to have a great chance to win because we know their D-line's going to get breaks.
And now would probably be a good time to talk about what we talked about before the break, the losses that Dallas suffered yesterday. Dan Emmons, Kevin Richardson, both not slated to play today. Do you think that has any impact on Dallas's ability to put up a strong defense, given that you thought New York's offensive flow was kind of a little bit tricky there?
Yeah. I mean, Dan Emmons is probably their best deep defender, and he was on, Yacht at multiple points in that game. He didn't necessarily do that great, but I think it's hard to cover Ben Yacht. So, but him being out, yes, that's one less person that they have to cover a big deep like a Dave Wiseman type. Kevin Richardson out, that's going to hurt the offense. I mean, I think there's no question that both of those guys would have played significant minutes and made significant impacts. I think the question for Dallas is, can they fill those roles? Can they have those young guys step up? Can we see that another big performance from Connor Olson? Can we see players step in and continue to play well the way that they did yesterday against New York?
And I want to throw this question to the coach on the couch. In this situation, if you are Dallas's head coach, how do you help your team mentally overcome, the losses that they suffered yesterday? Here's who we have today. Here's the tools that we have to work with. This is the task at hand. How do you encourage those younger players to step up and give a good performance?
Absolutely. Well, I think the Dallas team certainly benefits from a bit of a feeder program. We talked about this yesterday. They have a lot of involvement from their practice squad, from young people in the community that keep getting their jersey number called, so to speak. So to point to the success of that ability to basically prepare those players for the big stage, to point at those young players who had outstanding performances yesterday and essentially ask who's next. Right? I think that's a great way to motivate those players and to make sure that, as we also talked about yesterday, that the battle may be between those 14 to 20 roster spots over the course of the day. So that's empowering those players to kind of not necessarily reinvent their own game, but to realize that they're already good enough to make an impact in those places is a really powerful way to just kind of reinforce your culture and reinforce what you've already prepared for over the course of the season and make it seem like just another day at the office.
And I think one of those next men up that we're going to be keeping an eye on today is Zach Marbach. We saw him start to take the Babbitt, the Yacht matchups in the second half when Dan Emmons went down. And he may not have gotten any blocks on them, but he was creating tremendous pressure on underneaths that Emmons hadn't been able to get earlier in the game, whether we're talking about them going in or out. So I think he's going to be one of those defenders who's been on the roster, but he's going to be called to have greater defensive responsibility in this game.
You answered part of the question that I wanted to ask you, because you know the South Division really well. You've covered Dallas a number of times. Do you think that this position is one that Dallas will thrive under, knowing how many young, hungry athletes they have on the roster?
Yeah, I haven't seen a moment this season where pressure has gotten to this team. And they've had a number of instances to kind of crumble. You think about their season opener in crappy conditions against the star-studded Raleigh Flyers squad that was preordained to win the championship.
Right.
You think about the AUDL South Championship where they're on their home field, huge wind rolls in, Raleigh comes in, and they go down 6-goal margin to halftime, and then coming in the second half, they turn in one of the greatest comebacks we've seen in AUDL history. I just haven't seen them crumble under pressure. They've had adverse moments, but they've always found that way to punch back, and Wes Nemec has figured out how to launch those counter punches at the right moments before time runs out on the clock.
And now I want to open this up to all of you, and I just want to ask kind of the difference that might have on these two teams today, meaning no disrespect to the Pittsburgh Thunderbirds or the Detroit Mechanics, but them being the weakest teams in the Midwest. Aaron, you've had some games that you were relatively sure that you were going to win when you knew that you had to match up with them week after week. And I feel like the South Division just didn't have those gimme games. Even though Dallas has won over Austin every single time, this season Austin had some different looks that made Dallas, frankly, have to work a little bit harder for those wins. Do you guys think that is going to have any impact on today's performance, given that Dallas is just more battle-tested through the regular season than the Madison Radicals?
We're not going to see Dallas come out and give up 4 straight breaks. And like, seriously, I think that could have a big impact on the game. If Dallas gets going early and the crowd gets taken out of it a little bit, I mean, I just think that Dallas's depth is going to be something, even though they're missing a couple players, that still shines through today. And I think the being battle-tested and having a harder game yesterday, a lot of people are going to look at that and say, well, they're going to be tired today. But you can look at it the other way and you can say, well, they got steeled for difficult competition at this level, whereas Madison kind of put it on cruise control in the second quarter, almost let the Aviators back into the game. And Dallas, on the other hand, was in a tight battle the whole game, had to fight, and, had their offense and their D-line offense really cooking the whole game. So I think you're not going to see Dallas come out and get smacked around because of the crowd or the fact that Madison's coming out with fire. Maybe they give up a break, but it's not going to be this complete collapse like we saw from the Aviators, and that's going to make it a much more challenging game for Madison to persevere and win.
I also think it's interesting that just the order of the games yesterday, right? We talked to Tim DeBile, and he mentioned that he was prepared to face either of the two teams playing in the later time slot. But Wes Nemec had an opportunity to go into a spectating capacity as a coach, knowing that he had to watch, right, very specifically from that first quarter, who he was looking at, who he was scouting. So Coach Nemec has a little bit of a preparatory advantage here because he got to watch 3 quarters essentially knowing who his opponent was going to be, had a chance to focus on what they were doing and kind of have a little bit more time maybe to put together a game plan than necessarily the coaching staff for the Radicals.
A point made by a very true coach. Thanks, Aaron, for that thought.
I think your concern is valid, and it's something that was weighing heavily on me when I was trying to make my picks when Charlie and I were talking earlier this week. And yes, Madison has had an easier road along the way this season. The Midwest has been an easier division. I think that Raleigh loss here at home was an incredible wake-up call and kind of a culture shock that few other teams faced this year. No one really had to look themselves in the mirror. No one who's here at championship weekend, aside from maybe the Empire at one point, had to look themselves in the mirror and say, crap, who the hell are we? What's going on this year? After you have a powerhouse just come in and knock you out on your home turf. And I think that one event is providing the same kind of toughness and test and mettle that a series of tough AUDL South championships, AUDL South regular season games have provided for the Dallas Roughnecks. I saw a different level of confidence from this Radicals team on the field last night. I think they've learned from the challenges they've had this year and previous seasons, and I think they're ready to step up tonight.
All right, well then let's turn now to the Madison Radicals and talk about the weaknesses we saw exposed in their game against the Aviators, which, you know, given how quickly Madison took control of the game, can be kind of difficult to define because they were in the driver's seat the entire time. But the gap narrowed from an 8-point lead to a 4-point lead, and there's something to be examined there. So what did each of you see from LA that was giving Madison some trouble last night? Aaron, I'll start with you.
Well, not so much just on the LA side, but a quick note about Madison's defense, right? They went off to a break train right away in the first quarter, but all with kind of spectacular plays made in very small windows in kind of an inches game. That's very hard to repeat, right? So going on a hot streak of generated blocks, I don't have the stats, but it was a remarkable number of generated blocks. And again, it's just a hard to repeat phenomenon. So early in the quarter, you get on that hot streak, and then you can't sustain it. It's impossible to sustain for 4 quarters on turf like this, especially coming into the second game of the weekend for them. I'd be hard-pressed to see if they can generate the same number of blocks, certainly, but even maybe 50% of the same number of blocks. If they can, more power to them, but definitely hard to maintain that level of kind of generated effort on the defensive side. I also think it's a tempting mental place to be in when you feel like you're rolling a team. So back to LA, right? We're able to kind of shake off that first quarter and figure out what they were doing right. Played much cleaner after that. And I think showed us that they could have been a team to come meet Madison on a more level playing field. And that, in its own right, to meet confidence with confidence, seemed to slow the energy down for Madison. So Dallas coming in as a team unit who relies on each other for that culture and really plays in kind of a, you know, what is my role, how do I serve this team, and always projects that confidence, might be a little bit of a dampener on that Madison energy that they take so much pride in.
I really see it in the, you focus on the defense. I would really focus on the offense when I look at Madison's weakness. We saw in that Raleigh game their O-line get basically exposed. And yesterday, against what's really, frankly, an average Los Angeles defensive line, they gave up quite a few breaks. And obviously it wasn't enough to ever get them all the way back into the game, but that's because they were down 9-3. I looked at these numbers yesterday. From the second to the fourth quarter, Los Angeles actually outscored Madison 16-15. So, obviously Madison takes their foot off the gas pedal a little bit there, and you can't count that out. But I think we've seen their offense struggle at multiple points this season in lots of different games. I mean, you coached against them in games where their O-line was frankly bad at points in the game. And, they had to have a defensive run late in the game to basically be able to win in a game that really the wind chill had played better in. And so I think that's really going to be the big challenge for Madison today is, yes, they're at full strength. Yes, they looked good yesterday at points, but their O-line against what's a very good Dallas defense, one of the best in the league, I would argue, that's going to be the big question mark for me is, like, can they keep it going? They won. You talked about the defense winning jump balls. The offense won a lot of jump balls too. And Los Angeles defense, just okay. Dallas is going to throw a lot more athleticism and a lot more explosiveness at them.
And I think it comes down to how many of those offensive turnovers that Madison is inevitably going to commit are forced or unforced, right? Because a lot of the turnovers we saw yesterday were unforced turnovers, missed from the Madison offense. Missed connections on hucks, just simple little reset stuff.
Right. Not LA doing anything in particular.
Exactly. And so if Madison can be the ones controlling their own destiny, so to speak, on offense, and they are only turning the disc over when they make some kind of mistake, and it's not an overpowering Dallas defensive performance, just taking the disc away or forcing them to option 5 at stall 7, I think Madison's defense is going to be more confident, but I'm still unsure of just how much difference this Dallas defense is going to make, because I keep coming back to earlier when we were speaking on the couch, Brian Jones threw out what I thought was kind of a hot take. He said, we keep talking about how much this Dallas defense adapted yesterday, but did they not just play soft defense and back people by 15 yards and let New York throw the disc away on their own? Is that a defensive game plan recipe? You know, can you ask the Radicals to do that? Can you count on them to commit those mistakes on their own? That one really threw me for a loop, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly where I come out on it.
Well, let's talk then just a little bit more about Madison's defense, because that's come to define them. And I think we spend a lot of time talking about their zone, but they throw some really interesting person looks as well. They do a lot of switches, so you're never quite sure which lane is open. They love to make it look like you've got a good one-on-one matchup, and as soon as the big throw goes off, then one of the defenders sucks in, and suddenly it's 2-on-1. You know, Aaron, what do you think Tim DeBile is going to put on the field today? What's the best Madison defense for this Dallas offense?
I think watching Dallas yesterday, we saw that one of their favorite things to do was try to swing really wide across the field. And against New York, there were a few opportunities for big plays on those wide outs, right? Bo got a layout D on one of them. There's a Callahan play. I think if you're Tim DeBile, you've now seen that as something that you, like a toy that you can take away. So I think that he will be changing a little bit to kind of find those lanes and make plays in those. The other thing we noticed about Dallas's offense is just that we weren't quite sure maybe what their downfield offense was trying to do. And if I'm the coach for Madison, I might go into my arsenal bag and put a diamond around that vert stack or whatever shape it was. Not sure what shape it was. But in that way, kind of, again, conserving your energy on this second day of this doubleheader, also clogging those lanes and making it impossible, and basically forcing Dallas to play a cleaner offensive game with more decisive cuts instead of what we saw yesterday, which was a little bit haphazard and a little bit like chaotic in nature.
The things that impress me most from Madison's defense are their hybrid and transition looks. They are renowned for getting into those zone sets and settling into their zone sets, but I saw a number of times last night where they'd roll that pull out the sideline, they'd run a quick sideline trap for a throw, and then as soon as that first backwards throw went off, just like that, bam, they were transitioned and matched up person to person, and there was no glaring weakness or hole or next throw for someone to exploit. So it's almost like this defense has evolved in a way. They're using some of the flashpoints and tenets of their zone capability, but they know how to transition and get out of it quickly so that they can get their athletes matched up well.
Yeah, and I think calling them a team that runs a lot of zone is honestly a misnomer at this point. I mean, that's thinking back to 2 or 3 years ago when they did basically exclusively run zone, and that's when teams hadn't adjusted to it yet, and they were able to get a lot of turnovers from it. But that doesn't work against a team like Dallas. They're going to pick you apart. They have too many good throwers, and I think we saw yesterday Dallas throwing hammers all over the field and just tearing apart the break side, the weak side from New York's defense because they were overloading on the strong side. And so, you know, if Madison just tries to sit in a soft zone, it's not going to work against Dallas. But I think what you're saying is right. They strategically double team. They know when to take advantage of situations where they can switch, and they put people in positions to get good poach Ds. I mean, Kevin Pettit-Scantling, I mean, his WAR has got to be like 5. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the comparable stat is in Ultimate, but you know, out there yesterday, he gets 3 unbelievable blocks, all in different situations. He gets the poach D early in the game. He's kind of sagging off, and somebody throws a pass, and it was just a little too casual. And he gets a full extension layout D kind of on an under throw. Then he plays amazing reset defense and gets a sky D after shutting down a reset. And then later he layout Ds Chris Mazer and from his belly gets a second effort layout D. You never see that. And those abilities, like his big play ability, is something to watch today because they can put him in positions on the field, whether it's on a specific matchup or just in an area of the field, not necessarily playing quote-unquote zone, but putting him in a place like kind of like where the short deep would be, where he can just make something happen if they attack with something over the top or through the middle.
I think one thing to keep an eye on is Kevin Pettit-Scantling's health, because we remember that he did get a little dinged up yesterday. He bruised his heel really badly. From what I understand, that's kind of an ongoing thing for him. He was kind of joking with us at the set afterwards. Hey, you know, you don't run on your heels, though, right? You run on your toes. There's inevitably going to be some impact that he can't control. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see an 85% Kevin Pettit-Scantling today, and that means that someone like a Thomas Coolidge creeping in on the wing is someone who's going to have to make some more of those plays that we saw Kevin make yesterday.
I don't know. I would take Kevin Pettit-Scantling at 85% over a lot of people at 110% because he re-injured his heel earlier in the game before he made those last 2 Ds that Charlie described. So I think even a little dinged up, somehow he lets adrenaline mute any pain he might be feeling. Charlie, I think you may have answered the question that I was going to ask both you and Aaron. Who do you think has to have a big game for I'll have you answer that question for Dallas, and I'll want to hear who you think on Madison has to have a big game today. Earlier, before the break, Evan posed the same question, and Ian said Chris LaRock, which I think is a brilliant answer for Dallas. So, Charlie, on Dallas, who do you think has to have a big game today, and why?
Honestly, I think it's the same people we saw have a big game yesterday. Chris LaRock, absolutely. He had 8 assists yesterday, although he got bailed out a few times on some big plays from his teammates. Jay Fruit as well. I heard Brian Jones talking about him earlier in the show. I mean, look, their O-line needs to be able to go and do what they did yesterday, which is put the disc into the end zone with consistency. If they do that, I think they'll win. And the other thing is they're going to be against a defense that's tougher than New York's that they saw yesterday, and they're missing one of their big release valves in Kevin Richardson. And so you're going to need to see those big guys come out and have a big game. LaRock, Frood, if Brandon Malachek's out there a bunch again today, he can't make the kinds of mistakes he did yesterday. They got away with that. He had 3 turns that led to 3 New York breaks that tied up that game, and they were able to pull it out because of their defense. But if they have those kinds of mistakes today, they will not beat Madison. So,
Aaron, who on Madison has to have a big game?
Well, I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I think the battle is going to be not necessarily among the top players, but a little bit in that bottom set. So as Ian just mentioned, players like Coolidge are going to have to step up and have big defensive games. But back to that O-line and a little bit of the weakness that we saw yesterday, I think most of the guys on Madison who usually do the most work in the middle of the field, but maybe aren't usually the deep targets. So a Shry-Wise, a Ben Nelson, a Kevin Brown, they're going to need to make sure that they run a consistent and healthy offense that doesn't give the disc away overly too much. I'm sure that they have a little bit of a line. I think I've heard Madison talk about a certain number of forgivable O-line breaks, but they can't go past that line. They're going to need to really rein it in. Shots are fun to take, but they're going to have to be really selective in their matchups when they shoot today.
Sorry, one thing, Ian, and then go ahead. It feels like both of these teams have a stable of very good cutters and very good cutter defenders, and it feels like the distributor role, that kind of like midfield, and in the backfield in the handler set, that's going to be where this game gets decided. It's interesting to think about the stylistic differences. Dallas playing New York yesterday, a team that really is short on handlers. It's kind of Harper Garvey and then 6 cutters who sort of operate in hybrid roles. But that's going to be different than going up against this Madison team, which has more true handlers. How do they deal with that? I doubt we see that no mark, deep zone-ish look that they were showing New York yesterday, where they just didn't put a mark on Harper Garvey, because Madison will just eat that up. And frankly, New York did too. But I just think it's going to be interesting to see how the distributor role, that feels like it's going to be kind of a linchpin of this game.
I think someone who's had a huge impact on the Madison offense has been Kevin Brown. We talked about how difficult things were for that offensive unit when he was struggling with injury earlier this season. He had a couple ankle injuries that he struggled to get back from. Their offense is just a different unit when he's healthy and when he's on the field. And I think he falls kind of in between as kind of a hybrid between that distributor and cutter role. There are times when he'll get the centering pass or the first under, and he'll be the one who has to decide, hey, I'm actually going to pull the trigger and launch this to Shry-Wise or Wiseman, or I'm just going to find Colin underneath to contribute and continue distributing. I think Kevin Brown is going to be a huge X factor for this Madison Radicals offense.
Well, that about wraps it up for us for this Game Day Live. So thank you for sticking with us. For Charlie Eisenhood, Ian Toner, Aaron Maraca, I'm Megan Tormey saying stay with us. The entire season boils down to this one game. The final 2 halves of the 2018 season are about to be played by the last two teams standing, the Dallas Roughnecks and the Madison Radicals, coming up next.